Great. So today we're very fortunate. We have Clinton Marquardt here. He's going to be our speaker, and he's a sleep and fatigue specialist. I've had a privilege to see Clint very many times in his presentations. He's presented both at our local Fleet Safety Council and also at the annual conference in 2019. He's got a background in the transportation industry. He's worked for the Transportation Safety Board on the Human Factors team. So he's investigated many crashes involving all modes of transport. So he's a subject matter expert and a good friend of the Fleet Safety Council. Welcome, Clint, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan. Happy to be here.
Good. We thought we'd do this a little different. Clinton has pulled together some information that he can show us, and we thought we'd do a question type of presentation. So I've lined up a few questions for Clint, and hopefully we can harvest some of that knowledge to help us and make it specific to our current situation with COVID-19. But let me start, Clinton, by asking why is sleep so important, and what happens when we don't get enough sleep?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things to keep in mind, Dan, is that there's virtually no aspect of your life that isn't somehow impacted by sleep in some way. If you sleep better, the impacts are positive. If you sleep worse, the impacts are negative. So you'll see everything from short-term effects. So for example, and to make it a bit relevant to these times, if you don't sleep well or sleep long enough, or a combination, quality and quantity are poor, your immune system functioning is decreased. One really neat piece of research was looking at how well we can fight off the common cold. And the researchers, what they did was they put people in a variety of different sleep conditions. So some slept well, some sleep were experimentally disturbed. And then they took a little cotton swab and they dabbed a bit of the common cold virus on their noses, and they monitored who got sick. And they found that the people who didn't sleep well or sleep long enough got sick more quickly. So we don't have any studies around COVID, but if you extrapolate that study, it might mean that if you're not sleeping well now and you get exposed to COVID-19, it might be harder to fight it off. So that's a short-term negative outcome. If you're looking at longer-term outcomes, some pretty major diseases and disorders can have a relationship to the sleep you experience across, say, 10, 20 years. So for example, there's a pretty tight link now between sleep and some forms of dementia, primarily Alzheimer's. So if you don't sleep well for 20, 30 years, you're at an increased risk at developing Alzheimer's in the end. All sorts of great studies on longevity too. So if you sleep longer, you'll live longer. So the impacts are huge, and we should be looking at those impacts.
Yeah. So in the short term, it weakens your defense mechanisms, and then in the long term, it can predispose you to some other illnesses and diseases.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, and it's interesting. We were talking before everybody came on about the culture, and we all have one thing in common, that we all have the same amount of time available to us, 24 hours in a day. Nobody gets more, and our culture seems to be compromising, people are compromising their sleep to achieve more, but then comes with it a cost.
Yeah, and there's a pretty good reason for that, I think. If you look at how often we experience a negative outcome from shortchanging ourselves of sleep, it's not that often, or we don't make the connection. So you don't sleep well one night, well, you trudge through the day and then you're fine. So trading off a little bit of sleep for, say, more family time or getting more work done, the risk reward it's a logical trade-off. But if you do that repeatedly, that's where the troubles start to come in. Or on the odd case, if you do it just once and you're too fatigued, and say you're operating a motor vehicle, you might get into an accident. So, logically, the trade seems okay if you're looking at it long term, and short term. Generally, we're not crashing our cars every single day because of fatigue. So even short term, it seems relevant. But I think people have to look at the risks involved a little differently. Think about not actual outcomes, but the potential outcomes, and then start to reposition where sleep fits in their lives, and hopefully a slightly higher priority.
Yeah, and I guess what I think when I hear you say that, Clint, is that, you know, society seems to be, you know, tolerant of this. Everybody's doing it. And, you know, if you don't have that self-awareness, you know, how do you know if you got a problem? Because it's so prevalent and tolerable in society. How do you know if you really need if sleep is something you need to have a look at?
And that's the one of the challenges here. If people are looking for overt signs of poor sleep, they're sometimes missed unless you're getting really poor sleep. So, you know, think about the last time you missed, I don't know, say a whole night of sleep and how you felt. The signs were pretty overt. You're having trouble staying awake, your neck muscles relax, having trouble concentrating, reaction time is slower. But generally, it takes a lot for those signs to kick in. So we don't see when we're less fatigued, but still fatigued. And if you're not noticing the fatigue, you might not link it back to the sleep problems. You and I worked on a bit of a questionnaire over the last couple of days, and we'd be happy to make that available to anybody on the call. We've called it the sleep problem screening tool. So if you're trying to get an idea of whether or not your sleep is problematic, whether it's from a quantity perspective or quality perspective, you can answer this questionnaire, and it tells you, should you be concerned, should you not be concerned, and whether or not you should be speaking with a physician about it. So we can make that available at the end, right, Dan?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.
I find it very valuable because it kind of tips off some red flags. You know, did you want to show it now, or?
Sure. How about I show it really quickly, and then people can get an idea of what it looks like. Okay, so I'll just take over here. So here's the questionnaire. People should be able to see that. Can you see that at your end, Dan?
Yep, it's up. Yep, thanks.
Right. So the questionnaire is made up of two parts. You can see at the beginning, there's 8 questions that assess your level of fatigue on average across, say, the last week or so. That indicates whether or not fatigue is a little too high. This is called the Epworth sleepiness scale. If you use this, there are pull-down menus. So you simply select the number that best matches how you feel right now or in the last week or so. The top portion of the scale, after you've answered it, it populates this second area right here. So if your score is 9 or higher, you're probably a little too fatigued, and it gives you 1 point in the bottom area of the questionnaire. The bottom area of the questionnaire, you simply answer yes or no, 1 for yes, 0 for no. And if you endorse enough of these conditions, then you get to the range of 3 to 6 or 7 to 14, which tells you whether or not you should be speaking with a physician about your sleep problem. So it's not really assessing whether or not you have a sleep problem. It's assessing whether or not you should be concerned about it and whether or not you should be talking to a physician about it. And we'll figure out a way to make this available to everybody, maybe a download link in the meeting minutes or something like that, Dan. Would that work?
Yeah, sure, that would work fine.
Okay.
So tell me, Clint, about sporadic versus chronic problems, because, you know, some people could show some of those symptoms, but, you know, they're only sporadic and you can kind of catch up. I hear people saying, hey, I burned a little sleep this week, but I'm going to catch up on the weekend. Yeah,
so let's tie it back to what's going on right now. There's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety around COVID-19. We're starting to see how things are going to look after we pull through it. But there's a lot of people who are still experiencing disturbed sleep because of COVID-19. So that's where I would call it a bit more acute, or as you said, a bit more sporadic. The longer term outcomes we'll probably start to see once we return to our new normal. And if sleep problems remain, then it's definitely time to look into it. Some of the things to think about now are, how do you prevent it from becoming a sporadic or short-term or acute problem now and turning into something chronic a little bit later on? We can't get rid of the COVID stress altogether, but we can manage it a little bit differently. And there's something that is called the bedtime ritual that's really handy at preventing these sporadic problems from becoming chronic problems. So a bedtime ritual, what you do is maybe a couple of hours before bed, you start preparing your brain and body for sleep. One of the best things to do is what I kind of call exhaustion therapy. So you pull out a notebook and you write down all of your stressors, everything, just let it flow. And there's something about writing it down that helps to get it off your plate, get it out of your mind. Don't worry about solutions, just write the stressors down. Do that at the beginning of your bedtime ritual so that you no longer have to think about these stressors. And then carry on with more relaxing activities. So the next step might be to take a warm bath or a hot shower. Relax that way. Get into your pajamas. Turn off all your devices. Start turning down your lights so you're not exposed to bright light, and especially blue light in the evening, which impacts melatonin. And all the devices, all the TVs, turn down the lights, and then start doing something really relaxing. Some people enjoy meditation. Other people enjoy reading. If you are reading, make sure you choose a book that it's not too stimulating, because you don't want to be sucked into that book and then not be able to put it down. So an old textbook or a magazine that's easy to put down. And then you simply do that until you start to feel sleepy, start to feel fatigued, and then try and sleep. The trick with making sure that the acute problem doesn't turn into a longer problem is, now that you're in bed, if you start thinking about those stressors again, get out of bed. You don't want to lie there in bed and pair the stress with bed, because your brain learns pretty quickly that pairing. So the next time you lie in bed, you start stressing, right? So what you really want to do is take the stress out of the bed or bedroom. So if after your ritual, which should be an hour, 2 hours long, you lie down, you can't sleep, get out of bed and return to that last relaxing process, relaxing part of your bedtime ritual. As I said, maybe it's reading a boring book. Wait for the signs of fatigue to kick in again, and then try sleeping again. If you don't fall asleep, you keep repeating this procedure until you fall asleep. And that can help prevent the COVID stress and anxiety from creating longer or more longer lasting problems as we move out of the COVID-19 acute stress and into this new normal. So that's one of the best strategies people can use right now.
So do you suggest the same thing in dissociating, for example, when you wake up during the night and can't seem to get back to sleep, to actually get right out of bed and do some kind of activity until you can feel sleepy again, then get back to bed?
That's exactly it, Dan. Yeah, you got it. So this is all part of what is called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So we're borrowing techniques for treating insomnia to help us with this short-term stressors right now and preventing longer-term problems going on. So that's exactly it. Same thing. You wake up in the middle of the night, you start thinking, these what we call cognitive intrusions start. Get out of bed, return to that relaxing activity, the last activity, your bedtime ritual. Wait till you feel the signs of fatigue, signs of sleepiness, and then crawl into bed again. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay, so the bedtime rituals are not reserved for only toddlers too. Adults can,
no,
can benefit as well.
Very, very handy for toddlers, but handy for us adults too, yes.
So how about, can you tell us, Clint, about, this current time? Because there's a lot of stress and anxiety, and some people, could be having bad dreams, nightmares due to the stresses with COVID. What are some of the things that people can do to lessen these bad experiences?
So the bad dreams, nightmares, if they become frequent, then you should be speaking with a physician about them. However, if you're having them say once a week, something like that, as you're going through COVID-19, you can manage it a little differently. First thing you want to do is try that exhaustion therapy technique. Find a notebook and put all your stressors down into that book so that your brain doesn't continue to think about them as you're sleeping. The other really great technique, handy technique, is what we call dream incubation. You can actually change the content of your dreams if you practice the type of dream you want outside of sleep. So what we instruct people to do is create a dream that you would like to have. Maybe it's lying on a Caribbean beach right now, sipping a Mai Tai and just enjoying life. So you write that dream down in the greatest detail you possibly can. And then you close your eyes and you imagine having this dream. You practice it over and over a few times during the day. And then one more time just before bed. And you tell yourself, the next time I'm dreaming, I'm going to have this beautiful dream that I just had. And it works the same way as stress and nightmare dreams. Your brain doesn't shut off when you're asleep. It thinks and processes the same information that you're processing when you're awake. So if you're processing a good dream, you're increasing the likelihood that you'll process that good dream while you're asleep as well. So this is the dream incubation technique, and it works really well.
So it's like a visualization that promotes relaxation. It's your go-to place.
Yes, exactly like a visualization, but you have to think of it as, this is the dream that I want to have. So you gotta not just visualize, but tell your mind, tell your brain that this is the dream I want to have. Not just the visualization I'm having while awake. This is the dream that I really want to have. And your brain will remember that.
Right, right. Let me ask you, Clint, about some operational concerns given the situation, because our industry has been deemed an essential service, and many people are working extremely long hours with a lot of without any off-time duty. What can people do in those circumstances to stay safe?
So as a worker, as an employee, one of the things you really want to do is go back to thinking about, as we started our discussion, where you position sleep in your life. So our culture doesn't favor sleep really. So you have to fight against that culture and think about sleep a little differently. I know people are working long, hard hours with a lot of irregular hours as well. So what I suggest doing for now, temporarily, is putting some of the avoidable activities on hold. So if you can delay going grocery shopping a couple of extra days to, say, take a nap and increase the sleep that you're getting now, it'll help you well. So really reposition where sleep is in your life. Try and make it a priority for now while we're getting through this crunch. As an employer, what you really want to do is fight against that culture again of not prioritizing sleep and start having the discussions around sleep and fatigue now, so that people start feeling a bit more comfortable saying, you know what, I know we really have to work long hours, but I need a break to take a controlled nap, a controlled rest during the duty to get me through this duty. And if you can start that conversation, we can start looking at strategies and accepting the strategies that can be used just before duty and after duty a bit more. But it's really, again, about prioritizing sleep and starting that discussion more now.
Yeah, so promoting that it needs to be a priority. From a supervisor's perspective, Clint, like what would a supervisor that's overseeing essential workers, what kind of things would they be looking for in their employees to let them know that employee might be having a deficiency in sleep?
Okay, can I take over sharing again here, Dan? I want to show
sure.
a really quick slide here. Okay, so let me just bring it up. One of the things to think about is that whether or not an employer, a boss, a manager, somebody involved in safety can realistically, so you should be seeing a picture here now. Can you see that, Dan?
Yep, I can see it. Yep.
Yeah, so could somebody really spot somebody else who's fatigued? What I've got here is what's known as the fatigue spectrum. Now keep in mind the type of fatigue we're talking about here It's not mental fatigue or physical fatigue. It's what we call sleep-related fatigue, or we're really using the term fatigue as a synonym or another word for sleepiness. So on the spectrum, what you can see here is at the far end where you're asleep or extremely fatigued, it's pretty easy for a manager or supervisor to spot that fatigued person. They'll be slower. Their eyes will be closing. You might see their head bobbing up and down. That's easy. However, where it gets tricky is at the other end of the spectrum where people are a lot less fatigued and there are no overt signs of fatigue. What does happen at this end, however, is your performance starts to drop. So your reaction time will be more slow. You won't be making the greatest decisions. It'll make it harder to make those decisions. There might be what we call perseveration, where you kind of get stuck on something and you can't get off. It's sort of being stuck in a loop. So instead of looking for the overt signs of fatigue, head nods, when somebody is less fatigued, what you watch for is the performance impairment. So if you start to see employees who are making mistakes, are acting a little bit more slow, maybe having trouble making decisions, that's a sign they could be fatigued at that point. So I guess the flip here is don't watch for signs of fatigue, watch for signs of performance impairment. If you're seeing signs of performance impairment, then it could be due to fatigue, and it might be time to look into what's going on with that person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so deviations from their normal, typical performance, like what you've been accustomed to. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So let me go a little further in terms of because they've relaxed the hours of service regulations for the essential services. So what can employers do to maintain due diligence?
Yeah. So relaxing those rules, giving us a temporary exemption, does keep things moving, keep the productivity up, but it does increase a bit of risk. So really checking in with your employees a lot more, asking them how they're feeling, how they're dealing with the work. If you're seeing somebody who's having trouble with it, that's a good sign to see, can we sub in a different employee here? Or can we help this person manage their fatigue a little differently? And there's really two ways of doing this. There's what we call fatigue prevention strategies to keep them from becoming fatigued before duty, during duty, or even after duty and during their commute home. And then there's what we call countermeasures. So what can you offer to that employee who has to finish that duty time, finish that period of work? Some of the strategies there might be allowing the work to take longer to allow for that person to stop and take a nap. It's a little tricky to give all sorts of solutions up front because people also need some more advanced training on these preventative and countermeasure strategies. And without them, it's hard to just say, well, go and get a better night of sleep. But really, again, I think it's about raising awareness, having those discussions, looking for the problems. Don't wait for the problems to come to you. Look for those problems and then think creatively about, is there anything we could do to prevent fatigue? Is there anything we can do to countermeasure fatigue with these individuals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it seems that though MTO structured the exemption, they're not just blanketly opening it up. They want carriers in advance to select their drivers and their equipment and list them in advance. So that becomes your target group right there.
Yeah. And so why not, if you've got a target group, why not chat with them about how they feel about operating for longer times, and what can you as an employer do to help that person stay safe during those longer and more irregular operational periods. Yeah.
So this can be incorporated into your sleep management system where you focus on that target group and then document your actions of, interacting and checking in and assessing that target group.
Yeah, and I take it a step further too. So not just your actions, but what's the outcome of that action? Is it working? If it's not working, why is it not working? Yeah.
Right. So monitoring.
Yeah, build in this constant improvement process. Yes.
Right. So no, that's great. And I think just in my final question I wanted to ask you is, can you tell us about your professional experience? I mean, you must have been involved in a lot of crashes, um, and seen maybe some key lessons learned following some of these investigations you've conducted. Is there any common key things that you can share with us?
So yeah, you're right. I did spend 10 years with the TSB as their human fatigue specialist on their human factors team. But I've spent a lot of time working in the area before TSB and now after TSB. So in total, close to 30 years in the area of sleep and fatigue. And the one theme that I've seen running through that 30 years is that fatigue management, really well done fatigue management, needs a team approach. We need employees and employers to both work together. That's the biggest theme here. So if you're working together, it means that you both have to sit down and figure out how are you going to tackle this problem together, right? Management can't just say to employees, here's what you're going to do, because employees may not like it, they may not understand it. So you need the employees to work together with management to figure out the best approach here. And if the groups work together, you get a lot better outcome, better safety, better health, better productivity, and a whole host of other individual and organizational benefits. That's probably the biggest lesson learned. I'd say the second biggest lesson is that everybody, to be able to work together and understand how to do things well, needs some advanced knowledge on sleep and fatigue. We all know about the sleep hygiene techniques of, don't drink a lot of coffee before you go to bed. Don't sleep in a very uncomfortable bed. Those are basics. We all know those rules or those tips. But how many people knew about the tip we gave earlier of getting out of bed if you can't sleep? It seems counterintuitive, but it works. So organizations need to learn more about sleep and fatigue, and they need to help their employees learn more about sleep and fatigue in a much more advanced fashion to be able to do it well. That's probably the second biggest lesson learned across the 30 years. Yeah.
And even to that point that you made about the strategies, I mean, it becomes a little more unique when you've got a driver on the road sleeping in a cab, in a sleeper cab.
Right. So you have to design the solutions for that scenario, and it's not a one size fits all. And to be able to design specific solutions, you need a bit more knowledge to draw upon to do that.
Yeah. No, good discussion. If we can, Tanya, do you want to? Do we have anything coming in on chat?
I don't see anything.
Nothing.
But I have a couple of questions myself.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. And everybody's mic is open, so maybe we can do it that way and just kind of do around the table thing. So if you want, go ahead, Tanya.
So Clinton, one of the things that I learned about sleep is that a lot of our brain function creates so-called toxins, like waste in our brain. And the only effective way to be able to cleanse your brain is through sleep. But yes. I wonder, would a 15-minute nap be sufficient to be able to clear your brain of the toxins? Would an interrupted sleep be sufficient? So
yeah, no. So you're quite right. Some of that research comes from, there's a toxin called beta amyloid that is sort of a hallmark of dementia, and it builds up when you don't sleep well. But by not sleeping well, what I mean is not getting a good 6 to 9 hours of sleep on a regular basis every night, of good quality sleep too. So sleep, for it to be beneficial, has to transition through a number of different stages called stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and REM sleep across that 6, 7, 8 hour, 9 hour span for the brain to be able to do all that, as you call it, cleansing work. Where the shorter sleeps or the disturbed sleeps or irregular sleeps can help, however, is with reducing fatigue. So there's still a benefit to taking a nap wherever you possibly can, a 15-minute nap, a half-hour nap, an hour nap, what have you. It'll help with fatigue temporarily, But across your lifespan, if you're not getting 6 to 9 hours of good quality sleep on a regular basis, that's where it becomes problematic. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Another question I had is, a lot of the sleep, a lot of I don't know how to phrase this properly, but some sectors of our society have a lot of what we would call monotonous work, where you're just seeing the same thing over and over and over again, which and driving might be one of these types of professions. And does the monotonous work have a role in inducing some type of fatigue that really has to be, people have to be on the lookout for?
Mm-hmm. So when I'm talking about fatigue, I try to make sure everybody understands how we're using the term. What we've been talking about today is what I refer to as sleep-related fatigue. So fatigue that is caused by sleep-related factors. Where monotony comes in is in building up what we refer to as mental fatigue. Monotony is actually a stressor. So it tends to fatigue you mentally. It doesn't make you more sleepy, but it can decrease performance. Where the link to sleep-related fatigue comes in is that monotony allows sleep-related fatigue to surface. So if there's no stimulation, you have less to keep you essentially awake. So if there's any level of sleep-related fatigue in there, it will surface now. So it allows the fatigue to manifest, really. Now you combine that with the mental fatigue of monotony, and it's an even greater risk, yeah.
So, Clint, if I could chime in, I just question about the monotony, or, putting this context of a driver driving long distance. I know that it happens a lot on that 401 corridor after London, for example. A lot of people experience fatigue because there's really nothing out there, and maybe it happens in the prairies as well. What can drivers do to kind of, snap out of it and, maintain their attention and focus in situations like that?
So if the problem is being caused by monotony, then you've got to try and break that monotony. So stimulation. Now here's where it has to be really, really carefully done, because you don't want to increase stimulation that's then going to take attention away from driving, right? So you've got to be very careful in what you introduce. Radio is probably a good thing, but increasing the short breaks can be a good thing too. So it's not like you have to pull off the road and sit there for hours and hours. If it's just the mental fatigue, then stopping the task that you're actually doing, giving your brain a break by stopping, doing a quick walk around inspection, that can help. If there's sleep-related fatigue in there as well, then going back to Tanya's point, then maybe a quick nap could be helpful too. But the trick is to break that monotony, and if, like I said, if there's sleep-related fatigue, to counteract or countermeasure that sleep-related fatigue.
All right, just to break things up with different type of input, stimulus.
Yeah.
Great. I went around and you can open up your videos if you like, and maybe we can get a game of Hollywood Squares or something. But feel free, unless you're having a bad hair day.
Can I, Dan, can I share one more screen? So we've talked a little bit about these advanced strategies and advanced information, but we haven't really provided people with anything advanced other than that cognitive behavioral technique. It's hard to get into it in a 20-minute webinar here, but what I've done to help, at least during the COVID crisis, is I've set up a website called the Fatigue Management Network. It's a free resource for both the fatigue manager or the safety manager or occupational health and safety manager, or the actual workforce, the shift worker, the driver. If people are looking for tips, as they're saying these days, hacks, I'd be happy to help you out while we're all working through this crisis. Free. This is a complimentary thing. It's how I'm trying to help out the industry. So you can go to this website, Fatigue Management Network, pose your question, and I'll try and answer it as best I possibly can. And it's set up in a forum fashion so that other people can benefit from that Q&A as well. So that's a free resource where I can actually perhaps give some of the advanced information we've been talking about.
Oh, great. We could, I guess we could share, can we share that in the minutes?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Great. Well, that's good of you. Anybody else have any other questions around the table?
So Clinton, I might have one more.
Go
Sure,
for it.
go. Yeah.
You had talked about our societal expectations and how these are run, you know, in the opposite direction to this whole idea of sleep and its importance and the research that has been done more recently. So a lot of people would think that self-diagnosing sleep fatigue is something that is worth doing, you know, that, you know, having a check sheet, okay, do you feel tired? Yep. Or no, I don't. Is this a realistic expectation of people?
Yeah, so when I'm working with companies and we're trying to develop the equivalent of a safety management system, but specifically for fatigue, we call it a fatigue risk management system. One of the checkpoints we introduce in there is tools to self-diagnose or self-assess the level of fatigue. One of the tools, and we can make this available too, Dan, is called the Karolinska Sleepiness Scale. It's known as the KSS. And it's simply a series of, or a list of 8 scenarios, and you endorse the one that best matches how you're feeling right now. So for example, one of the statements is feeling a little slow, not having any trouble staying awake, however. And you can have a discussion with the company as to the level of risk you want to accept, such that people who score, say, a 6 or 7 or higher, that can be an entry point into a discussion. Well, there might be a little bit too high fatigue in this person right now. What do we do about it? Do we sub in a different driver? Can we offer some countermeasures? Can we delay the duty and allow this person to get a bit of sleep? And it's a pretty reliable tool. So that's the Karolinska Sleepiness Scale. I use it with companies to help them assess fitness for duty at the beginning of duty. But then during duty as well, we need to keep people safe, which means not fatigued, or at least a manageable level of fatigue. So I have them introduce assessment points throughout the duty as well. So they can repeat the KSS and design a process around it so that if the person scores so high, whatever that number the company decides on, what do you do about it? The other point or the other period where I use the KSS is after duty, because one of the biggest risks for people working irregular or non-standard hours is the drive back home, that commute. So are people safe to drive home? And you might want to introduce the KSS at that point too. Have them fill it out and say, are you good to go? Are you good to drive home? Or do you need to wait a little bit, maybe take some caffeine or have a quick nap in the locomotive, or sorry, the truck cab or a bunkhouse or something like that before you drive home? So quick answer, yeah, it's a realistic strategy, and there's tools there to do it. And we'll make one of them available, the KSS.
Yeah, so Clint,
and do you find that people become defensive when you know, there's a suggestion that they might not be able to perform due to sleep impairment?
This is where we've really got to work on the cultural side of things. So you're quite right. If people aren't being honest, or they don't feel, maybe it's not dishonesty, but maybe they just don't feel comfortable reporting fatigue, then these self-assessment type questionnaires and even a whole fatigue risk management is not going to work. So you really need to lay that groundwork around the culture of sleep and fatigue to help people feel honest, to help people feel reassured that if they report fatigued, nothing bad is going to happen. So you know, we've presented it in very simple strategies or simple approaches, but it's really not. It's a pretty complex process to get working well. But if you don't start, you're never going to get there.
And I just wanted to comment, I guess that KSS would probably be a good tool to incorporate in your monitoring and pre-screening of your target group if you're applying the exemption.
Yes, yes, most definitely. Yeah.
And it gets back to the due diligence piece as well.
Yeah, exactly. Due diligence. Are your people good to go? Have them fill out the KSS and have a little system built around it. What do we do if they score too high? What do we do if they are good to go? Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is great. Good discussion. I know we've gone over time, but this has been good discussion. Just want to take one more opportunity to allow for questions from the group. I think I've got everybody should be, yeah, everybody's mic is open. So are there any other questions? We're good? Great. Well, listen, thanks, Clint, for your time out of your busy schedule and giving us this information. It was really focused and timely. And we can work together on some of those resources, and I can get them in the minutes for follow-up for our members.
Sounds great, Dan. Thanks
Yeah.
a lot for having me on board. Thank you, Tanya. It's been a pleasure. If I can help out anymore, let me know. And as you said, we'll get those resources to everybody.